Hey everybody, welcome to another video on my channel, and this one we're talking about building a multi-tenant application within Superbase. Now, primarily I'm going to focus most of the attention of this particular video in Superbase itself and kind of how we kind of set things up. And then of course we're then going to turn our attention then to FlutterFlow, where I've kind of pre-built a little mini application, which as always I provide free with this particular content for you to download, explore and see and get it up and running, really kind of walk through this particular sample so you can kind of see it all in action. And then hopefully you'll be able to then take these skills and then start applying those to your own project. So as always, I try to make things as beginner friendly as I possibly can for the content that I deliver in my channel. So without further ado, as always across all of my content, let's get cracking. Okay, so before we get started in this particular tutorial, let's talk a little bit about a multi-tenant application. Now, if we bring out the classic to-do type application, we've all seen them out in the wild. They're kind of just like a task-based application. You can kind of create tasks, you can read, you can update tasks, and you can delete tasks themselves. Now, what we're going to do in this particular video is we're going to kind of do something very similar. We're going to have a very, very similar application, but the difference here, of course, is that our application is going to be slightly different in that the whole idea of it really is that a user belongs to a particular company. So we're going to want to make sure that in our application that is we separate company data. We really don't want to see any kind of cross pollution of company data. So all of our users are going to kind of be associated with a particular company. And of course, all of the users are going to want to do all of the usual create, read, update and delete activities on their particular to-dos. Now, the key thing, of course, here is that what we're also allowing us to do is we're going to put some role-based security in there as well. So quite simple, but we're going to kind of have a user who's just going to be a regular user. That's their role. And then you're going to have an administrator. And that administrator is going to have a kind of separate, or at least a different set of permissions, which can allow them to also update these particular tasks inside the application. So I've pretty well much got on screen here, which is describing kind of what a multi-tenant application in its most simplest form. So, okay, so what does that mean then? What are we going to cover then in this particular video? So the key thing I want to point out is that we're going to focus our attention in the Superbase world. So we're going to kind of get up and running with our Superbase project. We're going to kind of get ourselves in a position where we then can start creating the tables of our application. There's going to be 3 tables in this particular application, so really, really straightforward. But of course, tables and their data is not going to be enough. We're going to want to implement some particular security policies. Now, these are going to be really important to our application because our actual to-dos, our tasks that we're actually creating are going to kind of be pretty well much behind row-level security. And what that really means is that as soon as we enable that inside our application, we cannot get at that data from the outside world. It's not kind of publicly accessible. Now, in order to make that data accessible, we're going to have to apply particular policies on our data. So we're going to create 4 different policies in this particular application that's going to handle both the reading and the creating, the updating and the deleting of that particular data. So that's going to allow us at the server level to be able to control and kind of secure our data. Now, there's different ways and loads of different permutations of creating policies within inside Superbase. So of course, there's going to be different and other ways to do this, but we're going to kind of do this in a more simplistic form, and hopefully you're going to be able to take that knowledge and of course build on that in your particular use case. Now, of course, once you've got the policies in place, we're going to want to kind of demonstrate, we're going to kind of test these rules out. Now, what I've got here is I've got a pre-built FlutterFlow application, which I will walk you through all of the elements of that particular FlutterFlow application. So hopefully it should make all sense. And then we'll test it out and we'll show these policies in action. And like I said, the main thing is that our data is kind of safe on the server and the policies are enforced on the server. And our FlutterFlow application will do a little bit of checking for kind of visibility. It will kind of store like a role in there, so we know it's an administrator or a user. And that will control some visibility elements within inside our FlutterFlow application. But the safest point to make is that our data is certainly still protected on the circuit, on the actual database itself. So of course we can make sure that anybody who tries to circumvent, if they're not using like a mobile application or they're trying to do that in the web browser, then there'll be enough there on the server side there to stop users from kind of getting at that particular data. So that is pretty well much in a nutshell. Let's now get into the main part of the video. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is set up a free Superbase project. So just hit new project within Superbase here. I'm going to choose my organization as training because this is where I kind of put all of my free accounts here. I'm just going to call this one to do here. I'm going to generate a password and I'm going to set the location to be West Europe, which is where I am situated. So you want to try and choose a region which is closest to yourself. Hit create new project. So we're going to let that do its thing. We're going to get it to set up the project for us. Once it's kind of done everything for us here, then we need to set up some other details within the project. So we're going to set up some user accounts because we're going to need a variety of different user accounts to kind of be associated to the table data that we're going to have. And there's also a couple of little configuration items as well when you set up a brand new project within Superbase. And we'll come back and do that very shortly. Okay, so next up, let's head over to the authentication settings here on the left-hand side. Just choose that. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to go down to providers first. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is just come into here and I'm just going to turn off these two toggles here, just so it doesn't give us any trouble at all in terms of registering brand new users. You might want to, for example, allow users in your front-end application to kind of to create an account. We obviously don't want to send any kind of confirmation emails or anything like that. So keep it nice and straightforward. Hit save. Now what I'm also going to do is I'm going to move over to users, and this is where I'm going to create now 3 user accounts. Now the first user account is going to have a specific role of just as a general user. The second account that I'm going to create is going to be an administrator, and then the third account is going to be a user again, but I'm going to associate that with a different organization within inside my project, just so we can then see the difference with data kind of loading and make sure we kind of got all of our kind of policies in place that prevents kind of data being displayed to the wrong organization. So let's first create those here. I'm going to go to add user. I'm going to create a brand new user here, and I'm just going to simply in here put a couple of Digital Pro accounts in here, and I'm just going to go ahead and do that just with an email address and a password, and then I'll show you those on screen. Okay, so there we go then. I've got all of my 3 accounts here. You can see I've got Digital Pro there with no number, then I've got a 2, and then I've got a 3. So then we're going to be able to sign in now with these particular users, just create a kind of like a little dummy password. The key thing to remember here though, of course, is I've got these kind of unique user IDs. We're going to use those very shortly when we come back to our tables, because we're going to create a users table in the public schema of our particular project that's going to kind of sit alongside all the other tables that we create. And the key thing is this user ID will be there as a key within that particular table itself, so we can kind of link the two up as we go throughout this particular set of videos. Okay, so in our Superbase project then we have no tables currently, and we need to create 3 of them. The first one that we're going to create is a company's table. Now that's going to have like a unique ID, and it's going to have a simple name to represent a company. Now the good thing is that when we then create users in our next table, we're going to associate those particular users with a company. Now of course, no to-do app is possible without to-dos themselves, so we're going to have to create a table to hold all of our to-dos. And the key thing there is obviously we can have a title, description, and a Boolean indicator to demonstrate whether it's completed or not. But of course, every to-do needs to be associated with a user, the one who is creating it. And also as well, we need to associate that to-do with the company itself, because we are obviously creating a multi-tenant application here. We want to make sure that the to-dos that are created by the users are completely separate in different companies. We don't want them to kind of overlap. So it's important that we associate the company ID as well. So instead of creating these tables by hand, I've created a series of SQL scripts, some SQL scripts that you can run with inside a Superbase itself. Now, if you are following along with inside the No Code Academy, then I have an article which provides you with an easy copy and paste of all of those scripts, and we're going to play those out very shortly. But of course, if you are following elsewhere, then there'll be a link in the description where you'll be able to then download all of these particular scripts and then run them one by one. Okay, so let me show you then these particular tables that we're going to create here. So here is the SQL script. Now this is going to create the 3 tables. Let's have a look at the first one here. You can see it's very straightforward. It's going to create a table called companies. It's kind of an ID, which is going to be its primary key, and it's going to have a text field there just purely for the name. And then of course users is quite straightforward. Again, we have a UUID, which is kind of that long kind of list of numbers that I showed you when we created the users just a second ago. That's going to be unique for the user that's going to get created. We're going to kind of populate that value here. Of course, it's going to have an email address. The company ID is going to link to just up to this particular ID here. And then of course we've then got this role. So of course every single user can either be a user or it can be an admin user. So by default, when we create a brand new row in this particular table, the user is going to be defined with a role of just a user. So again, a very, very simple table. And here is our to-dos. Again, just a kind of a primary key there for its ID, a title, description, whether the to-do is completed or not. Again, this is going to reference the company just at the top here. And then, of course, it's going to also reference the user ID. And we've just got to create it at timestamp as well. So super, super simple. Now, these all need to be created in order. Now, I'm just going to simply just hit the run here. And that's going to execute all of those particular commands here, the SQL sort of scripts, and then I'm going to find that all of my tables are now created. If I just move over here, you can see I've got my companies, to-dos, and my users all created. So next up, I'm just going to create some sample data for the companies themselves. I could have gone into the tables and just added a new row, but here is a quick SQL statement here that's just going to create that for me. I'm going to create two rows in my table called Company A and Company B. If I just run that, move back over to the tables here, go to then the companies, and I'm just going to hit a quick refresh here. And there is my company A and my company B. So that's all set up quite nicely for us. Again, we've got no to-dos here and we've got no users in here. So what I'm now going to do is it's going to be important that we firstly now create the users that we have in this particular set of tables. And I'm going to show you how to do that now. So I'm going to carry out the next step for 3 of the users. I'm going to show you how to do it once. And if you just do the same thing again, we're going to start with the first account that I created, which is the Digital Pro with no number. This is just going to be my user. So here you can see here, this is the UID that I need. So I'm just going to kind of copy that there. And I'm now just going to move back over to my table editor. I'm going to go to users and I'm going to insert a brand new record, insert row. Now the ID at the top there, I'm just going to paste that value in here. Now I just need to match up my email address, the Digital Pro. The digitalprooutlet.com. Company name, let's select the record. Now this user is going to be associated with company A like that, and the role is just going to be a user. So that's it. I'm just going to hit save. Now what I need to do now is the Digital Pro 2 account that I'm going to create here is going to be a role admin, and then the next account that I'm going to use is going to be then associated with the company 2, but it's just going to be a user itself. I'm just going to go away and create those now. We'll come back and we'll just have a double check to see how this looks. There we go then, all the users are created. You can see here that I've got my first 2 accounts there, which is associated with a company 1, and then the top one here is associated with company 2. And you see I've just got an admin user here. This is going to be important when we kind of demonstrate this in our front end application, where we'll be able to log in as these particular users. We're going to see different data sets. We're going to be able to do different things as well. And a good thing about this is it's all going to be then restricted and controlled within Superbase itself, because we're going to move on very, very shortly to creating kind of the security policies that we need to kind of enforce the rules on the back end. So next up, we need to enable row level security on our database tables. We want to kind of tighten things up completely by default. So by doing this, it means that we can't get at our data for any purpose whatsoever until we start creating what's called policies that kind of open up under various conditions. So we can set row level security in a number of different places. You can do it at table level. So here I've just got the to-do selected. I could hit the RLS disabled button here. That would then enable a row level security, or of course I could do it into the SQL editor here, and I've got this simple SQL query here which will alter the table to-dos and enable row level security. Now in this particular kind of video series, we're just going to simply do it on the to-dos table, but of course you're going to want to really consider setting row level security up on other tables as well. So this one we can do the to-dos. I'm just going to run this particular statement here, and of course you're not going to see anything as a result come back. You're just going to have to then assume that it's all done. But there is one little simple check you can just make here. You go back to the table editor and you can see now the little padlock, the little kind of unlocked padlock that you see here is now disappeared. So we know that that one is now tightened up. So the next bit that we need to work on then, of course, is the actual policies themselves. So I'm going to kind of load up the SQL editor here with kind of all of the policies that we're going to run, and I'll kind of walk you through what they mean. Okay then, so in Superbase you can create policies in a number of different ways. We're going to keep true to this particular series and continue to create them via SQL scripts, but there is different ways in Superbase you can do this. So let's talk through each of the policies that we're going to put in place inside our application. Now there's 4 policies that we're applying here, and they all apply to the to-dos table. Okay, now without these policies in place, as I said before, we won't be able to do anything with inside the data of our database. So let's have a look at the first one, allowing the viewing of to-dos. Now this is quite simple. You can see here that this particular policy is all related for the table of to-dos, and it's for a select operation. So this is kind of reading back data. And you can see here that I've got other ones here for insert of records, update of records, and I've got one down here for delete. So that's how we're differentiating between the policies. So let's go back to the select then. So what is this doing? So each policy needs to return back either a true or a false. Okay, if it's true, then that operation is allowed. If it's false, then clearly it's not allowed. So what we're really doing here is we're actually saying, okay, so do a lookup inside our users table. And you can see here I've got this ID equals auth UID. So as an authenticated user who's making that request into Superbase, I'm going to carry a user ID. Okay, so that is really, really important. That user ID needs to match the ID of the user of the table. As you saw previously, when I created a user, we had that UUID, and of course, that is going to match up to the UUID that's going to be passed in during every single request. So this is what I'm doing. I'm saying, right, go into the users table, match up the ID with the ID of the user, and return me back the actual company ID. Now that company ID is then going to be checked here for the actual company ID itself within inside the actual to-dos table. So of course, this is going to then make sure that I return back all of the records that are matching that particular company ID. So hopefully I've tried to explain that quite well. So of course, if you've got an ID of 1 or a 2, then clearly there's going to be different IDs, but the user can only be part of one particular company. So this just ensures that I'm getting that result set back that matches the company ID that I'm allowed, or at least associated with the records where my user ID is already associated. So that's important for the viewing the to-dos. Now moving on to the adding a to-dos, this is exactly the same for an insert. Our users can create records, our users can view records. This is exactly the same check that it's doing here on the to-dos. Okay, so next up then we've got the update policy. There's a little bit more going on here that I can explain. Okay, so the first bit is really just saying, as a user, am I allowed to perform this particular sort of operation? So here we've got the same thing again, company ID, that is exactly the same. And then we kind of got this and going on, and it's kind of doing this or check. Now, in our application, our to-dos can be updated by the user themselves. So kind of this is what we're kind of matching up here. Is that true or false? And then we kind of got this or, and this is where we are allowing the users, if they are an admin, to be able to also update the actual data themselves. Okay, so that allows us by a role to allow them to update the particular to-do. So this is kind of what this check is actually doing here. Now this particular bit is a little bit more different because we need to put this with check in here, because what we're really just trying to say here is that at the time that the data is actually being written, does it still actually comply with the policy itself? And again, it's doing exactly the same check. So it's kind of like a little double check going on there for this. Now that is allowing us obviously to update data. Now moving on to the actual delete itself, again, very, very similar. We want to allow the users to delete their particular to-dos, but of course we also want to allow the administrators to also delete as well. So that's right, again, we've got exactly the same setup here where we're just doing that kind of or check with inside this and here. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to simply now execute all of these particular policies. This should all be valid, and I should just be able to run these straight away, and they should all correctly be successful and run. So if I now go back to then the table editor, and I go back to like companies, to the to-dos itself, I can then go up to then the auth policies up here, and you can see that those policies have now all been created for insert, select, delete, and update. And of course I could go in here, of course, I could edit this particular policy. I can also disable RLS, I can do all that kind of stuff, or delete the policies themselves. If I just look into this insert, you can see here, this is very similar to what you had seen previously. So hopefully that kind of makes sense on terms of the policies being created. They are now in place now, which means that it pretty well much sets us up now to get into the front end side of our application. And I've created a front end example here in FlutterFlow, which will then I'll be able to demonstrate these policies kind of in full operation. So let's head over to FlutterFlow now and let me walk you through the FlutterFlow project that you can also clone as well, and you can get yourself up and running in this particular example. Okay, so my front end tool of choice is going to be FlutterFlow for this particular sample. But of course, the rules are running in the Superbase project, of course. So kind of any front end that you kind of put on this, you should still see very, very similar results. So how do we get this project set up? So the link is in the description. Please do go and clone this particular project. But there's a little bit of kind of a plumbing that we need to do. We need to kind of get this project set up to your particular Superbase project, certainly if you are following along in this particular series. So what we need to do is we need to head over to then the little cog here. We need to move down to Superbase integration. Just make sure that you got use Superbase V1 turned off. Now, of course, that is going to be deprecated maybe by the time you watch this particular video, and it will probably be defaulting to V2 of Superbase. We need to get the API URL and the anonymous key from our Superbase project. So let's just head over there now to Superbase. Let's move down here then to project settings, and I'm just going to move down here. In fact, I'll go to then the API, which is the best option here, and then you can see here I've got the project URL. So just hit copy. Let's move back over to our project. Let's just paste that in here, move back over to Superbase, and then we've got this anonymous public key. So we just need to grab that here, the API key, and we're just going to paste that in there. Just hit get schema, hit yes. So that's going to, of course, means that all of your schema is going to come in here. So you kind of got all of that now made available to your FlutterFlow project, which you can, of course, apply that throughout the rest of your project. So that's kind of like the Superbase setup part. Okay, so I've pre-built this particular application so you can explore in your own time. But let me walk you through how it works, how it functions, and the bits I need to make you aware of in order for this to work. So it's a really, really simple application. There is nothing special going on. It's not going to win any awards in terms of design, because what I'm trying to demonstrate here is I'm trying to demonstrate the use of bringing back the data, adding new data, and then also being able to delete and also update as well. So I just kind of got a variety of different actions that actually perform those operations. Now, the key bits to point out, of course, is that I've got no ability here to create user accounts. This is going to assume, obviously, that the users are already created and they are already associated to a company within inside the actual database itself. As you know, previously, we created those users and we associated them with a company. So if we look here, I've just got a sign-in page. There's a little bit going on that's slightly different here, because what we're doing is we're kind of assigning the user in, and then what we're doing is we're then making an additional query into our Superbase database to return back the user data that we want to associate and persist with inside our application. We're going to want to make sure that we keep hold of the role. We can keep hold of the user ID if we wanted to, and perhaps the email address, although I'm not particularly too worried here. In the application, I'm just displaying the email address at the top of the page once you're actually logged in. So let me show you how that bit works first. So I just need to move over here then to the data types bit, because I'm just creating this kind of data type called user, and I've just set up the company ID, an email, and the role itself. Now, I've set that up here, very simple, integer, string, that's fine. And what I've then done is I've then created then an app state variable called user, which is of that particular data type. And now that's really straightforward. Just go to add app state variable. You can choose the data type of user that I've created, and then that allows me then to set various fields. So I've created that, and it's just called user. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to log the user in, and then I'm going to do that query as I said I did before, quickly retrieve those values and persist those in the app state. Now, of course, because it's an app state variable, that's then going to be available throughout the whole of my application. So what I'm going to now do, go back over to the widget tree. Let's have a look at this particular sign-in action. There's a couple of little differences here to perhaps how you might do this very simply in FlutterFlow. If I open up the action flow editor, let's have a look and see what's going on here. So I've got the irregular auth action here. Now, the key thing with this auth action is I've taken off this navigate automatically, because by keeping that toggled on, which is normally by default, as soon as the user has users logged in, they'll be redirected back. They're redirected to the home page of the application. So of course we don't want to navigate automatically. We want to do that additional kind of check. So here I'm saying, is the user logged in? So again, another little check here. We've got this global property called is user logged in. Typically, if they've typed in the username and password and it's correct, they'll head in this particular direction. So here, this is where I'm kind of doing that back end call into Superbase, into the users table that we created earlier, and I'm trying to retrieve that particular value. So here I'm going to go to filters. My ID is going to be equal to then the user ID. Now this is going to be of the authenticated user. If I just hit the little pen here, you can see that I've got this very convenient kind of source here called authenticated user, and I'm grabbing hold of the user ID. So once we've got that user ID, of course we can then be returning back all of those records throughout our application. So that's really, really important. So what this is going to do is this is going to return this action output variable called dbuser. So the result set is going to come back from the database. I'm going to store that into a variable called dbuser, and then I can now use that elsewhere in the next action. And I'll show you that now. If I just scroll up here, we then got update app state. And here I'm just doing the update fields of the user. So again, I'm just choosing the app state variable user. I've got my update fields, which is going to be update user. And this is really where I'm just setting, okay, what is the company ID? What is the email? What is the role? That's the values that's come back from that DB user that you saw just up here. And you do that by going to the values here. And then what I'm saying is if I just could show you here, I've got the available options here. I can say, here's the DB user variable. I'm getting the item at the index, the first row that has come back. And here I'm just pulling out the Superbase row field. You can see other fields are available here. But here I've just choose company ID and hit confirm. I'm doing the same thing for the email, and I'm doing the same thing for the role. So I'm just persisting those values as come back and storing those in my app state variable. And then, of course, once that's done, I'm then just going to do the navigate to the home page, because here I'm down in the true path. I know my user is authenticated. I've persisted the values that I need in the app state variable, and now I'm navigating to the home page. So that sets us up then quite nicely, and then we can then move on to the home page. Okay, so what exciting things have we got on the home page then? Well, you can see here that I've kind of got this to-do column. This could be the list view, but I just made it a column here. Now that is doing a database query. So if I just move up here, I can now see I've got this query into Superbase, and what I'm doing is I'm just bringing it, really all I'm doing is I'm just bringing back all of the rows of the to-dos, and I'm filtering just purely on whether they're completed or not. So I'm saying completed is not equal to true. So of course my application is going to allow me to hit that little tick button there. It's going to do an update in my database, and it's going to mark that as true. So then typically what would then happen is I'll do a refresh of the actual database query itself, and of course that will then be marked as true in the database, and it will be hidden from sight. So that is kind of my update operation. Now that is just going to be carried out by me just hitting on this little check here. If I move up to then the actions, open up that here, you can see that I'm doing my backend call, I'm updating my rows, and really all I'm doing is I'm saying, right, let's match on the ID of the actual row itself. So I can just go in here and I can say to-dos row ID, hit confirm. Is that equal then to then the ID itself? So that allows me to then filter on that particular row, and then of course all I'm doing here is I'm then setting the completed to be true, and then once I've done that, of course that will then be persisted in the database, and then of course I'm doing a refresh here. I'm kind of loading that query here by saying please do a refresh of the to-do column. Well, that's going to execute that backend query on that to-do column, and I'll see the latest update that comes back. So that's what that action is actually doing. The delete is doing something very, very similar. Open up the action flow editor here. I'm just carrying out a Superbase query here to delete the row. Again, I'm kind of doing the match here. I'm making sure that my ID is equal to the actual row that I've kind of got selected here. And then the row is going to be deleted, and of course I'm just going to refresh again that to-do column, which is going to execute that backend query again. So that keeps all of this all nicely in check. Now in here, of course, I've got the title. This is really just showing the title of the actual to-do here. I can click on this here, and you can see I'm saying get row field. It's the Superbase row of title, and that's simply just displaying that as a text label on the UI. So what am I doing down here? I've got this add option here. If I just select this again, really, really simple. Again, it's just inserting a row. And really all I'm doing is I'm just setting some fields. I'm saying, right, okay, carry out an insert row on my to-do table. I'm going to set the title. I've done the text combination here. I've just said it's test. And I've got this random number that's going to get created. Every time I hit add, it's going to create a random number. And that's all it's going to do. That's going to set the title. Now, this is the key bit that's really, really important. We also need to set the company ID and the user ID. So this is quite important because what we're kind of saying here is that when we create these brand new records, when we create that insert, of course, Superbase doesn't know anything about who the company is or who the user ID is. We need to set them themselves. So remember I did that query and set the app state variable that's going to hold the company ID. This is exactly what I'm doing here, is I'm popping into the app state variable here. You can see it's app state, it's the user. I'm getting a data structure field and I'm pulling out the company ID because I know that's available to me. So I'm going to save that with my record. And then here is my user ID. Where can the user ID come from? It could come from the app state variable I wanted to because I was kind of persisting that. But here, I'm just going to pull out the authenticated user. Again, there's a nice convenient function here with inside FlutterFlow. You can say authenticated user and you can say user ID. That's all that I need to do. So I can associate that with my record. So that's really all I'm adding to my to-do. Now that's going to create my record. It's going to insert it. And then all I'm doing here, doing exactly the same thing previously and doing a bit of a refresh. Hit close. So that is going to then add a random record here. Log out is just going to simply allow me to just quickly fire off one action here, which is auth log out, and out of the application I go. So that is as simple as it comes in terms of doing the kind of the create, read, the update and delete operations. There's only one more bit to show you, and that is the conditional visibility. Now, of course, these particular sort of icons are being displayed depending on the user themselves. So, for example, if I just hit on the, say, completed icon here, if I move over here, I've got this conditional visibility here. So if I just select that here, and really I'm kind of saying that I only want to display the check if the user role is equal to admin. So again, as we said previously, admins can kind of do updates or they can do deletes in terms of our application. So this is kind of allowing the checkbox to be displayed. Or of course, if the user ID is equal to the user ID. So we just want to make sure that all users have the ability to mark their to-dos as complete. So again, I'm just making sure that I'm just really using kind of database values here or state-based values here to kind of control the visibility of certain things on the UI. And that's exactly the same for this deletion icon as well. The same rules apply here. It's the same conditional visibility rules. So the key takeaway from this point is that we are kind of, when our user logs in, we're kind of setting the role of that particular user. We're saying he or she's an admin user, or they are just a general user. And then the setting of that can then control the visibility of particular widgets throughout the user interface. And that's something that you should get used to when you're building these type of applications in terms of controlling the kind of the visibility of certain widgets based on what they can and cannot do. But this is just a really simple way to kind of demonstrate that. And finally, just really at the top here, I'm just displaying the email address of the user and of course the role of that particular user as well, just so we can kind of preview that here. So now that is pretty much a nice little walkthrough then. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fire up this particular application and we can start to see some of this stuff come to life in terms of the rules that we've got set with inside Superbase itself. Let's head over to the test mode now. Okay, so up and running in test mode then. Here is the first user account of company A. So I'm just going to sign in here. This is going to take me to the homepage. You can see here I've got my kind of my email address up here and I've got a role of user. You can see I've got no records here at all. So let's create our first record. If I hit add, I've got this random record that's now being created. And you can, if I just pop over there to Superbase and I move over the to-dos, you can kind of see I've got that created. Of course, it's just false. It's a company of one. There is my user ID and there's a timestamp that I've actually created it with the title. So it's all there created. And of course I can come along and I can create another one and I'm just going to hit another one and I'm just creating all of those additional random rows. And of course I can do everything that I'm allowed to do here is I can kind of like hit delete. I can start deleting these out. So we're going to have to make an assumption at this particular point that my policies are kicking into place, that I can actually, I'm allowed to delete those particular records. Let's just add a few more random ones in here as well. And of course, I can mark one of them as completed. So you can see here, I'm just going to check this one here, test 89. If I check that, that's now going to disappear. If I just move back over to my database, let's just hit a little refresh here. You can see now I've got the 4 records here. Test 89 is now set as completed is true. So that is looking like my policies are being applied. And it's important to note because clearly I've got my row level security that is set. So I must be getting through those particular policies, which is a good start. Now I'm going to now log in as the administrator, and I should then also be able to carry out these particular functions. Now if I just head back over here, let's hit a log out. Let's now log in now as that particular user, hit sign in. Okay, so now I'm the admin. There is the new email address. You can see I've got all those rows come back. And of course, as that administrator, I can now check to see if I can sort of do stuff. Let's hit delete. That all goes. Let's just hit the little check here, and I can also do that as well. Now if I just pop back over to Superbase, let's just do a little refresh here, and you can see now I've got those couple this marked as completed. So it looks like that particular rule is actually working for me. Now of course this is a multi-tenant application, so as a different company, or at least a user that's associated with a different company, we're going to kind of want to log into our application, but we don't want to see this particular data. So if I now head back here, let's now log out. So if I now sign back in now as that another user, you can see now I'm not getting any data coming back. And of course I can hit add here. I can add a few more in here, etc. Let's go back over to Superbase. Let's hit a little refresh. And you can see here now I've got records now that are part of a company too. So you can clearly see now we've got a kind of like a separation there of the company records. Now, of course, it can get a little bit more interesting as well. So if I go back here, now I'm going to just log back out here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to log now in is put an 8 in there. There we go. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just as this particular, in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pop over here to Superbase here. Let's go back to the users. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark the Digital Pro 2 here, which is part of still company. I'm just going to take this off of admin, and I'm just going to now set that as a user. So let's now head back over here. Now I'm just going to carry on as the first user. I'm just going to carry on creating a load of records. So this is kind of my own. Now if I log back out, and if I now log back in, now I'm logging in as user 2 now. And you can now see that I can't do nothing with these particular records because they're still associated with my company, because the rules of this application is that I can see all company data, but of course there's a different selection of user data that I shouldn't be allowed to manipulate, which is what this is now restricting me from actually doing. So if I hit add here, you can see now I've got my own data that is now coming in. So of course I can do everything I was allowed to do on my own data, but of course I can't manipulate other users' data. Now you might be thinking, well, how can you prove that? Because you put conditional visibility rules inside the UI that is kind of like hiding the icons in the first place. Now if I head back over to FlutterFlow, I'll take off the conditional visibility rules of those particular icons, and then we'll try seeing if we can actually now then delete those particular rows. So let me just head back over to FlutterFlow now. Okay, so here I am back in FlutterFlow. Let's quickly turn these off. Let's just turn these conditional visibility rules off. Let's just wait for this to finish doing its syncing. Let's pop back over to then test it. Okay, so here I am now, and you can see that I've now got all of those icons now available. Now we know the first set of records don't belong to me. Now if I try deleting these, you can see that it's not allowing, it's not happening, nothing is being deleted. Same with the updates as well. And that is because those policies are clearly blocking everything that's happening behind the scenes. So hopefully that's a good little demonstrator there. I don't want to keep these kind of set like this. I want to go back into my application, update them, so then I've got a good sample to present to you guys. But hopefully that makes sense. So there you go. Hopefully you enjoyed this particular video. I can't stress enough how important row level security is to your Superbase projects, it's always important that you kind of lock down your data. You certainly don't want people coming in and pulling data out that they're not allowed to see, or at least manipulate as well. And that means you can then focus your attention on making sure that you are building beautiful looking front end applications. Now, of course, the other thing as well is, of course, if you're using something like Firebase, you need to make sure you also apply the rules in there as well to ensure you're doing something very, very similar to what we're kind of doing in this particular project. But of course, that is for another video. So there you go. My name is Steve. I'm the Digital Pro. I'm a FlutterFlow ambassador for Europe. You'll see that on my YouTube channel, I certainly cover a lot of FlutterFlow content. And of course, the Digital Pro's No Code Academy is designed for, yes, people who enjoy FlutterFlow content, but it's also as well other kind of content that you might find it useful as well. So please do come and join. The link is in the description. It's got a great community, lots of sample applications, code libraries, you name it, is there. Please do come and have a look around as well. So of course, you want to keep it on YouTube, that's absolutely fine. Please do subscribe to the channel, and of course, please do like the video as well, because that does get it out to the masses. And I see a lot of people who kind of watch my content and not necessarily are subscribers as well. So please do become a member of the Academy on YouTube. So there we go. So until the next video, I'll see you soon.